lot of movement late last week when it comes to litigation against Illinois' gun and magazine ban, and it's going to be a big week in litigation against that law. Good morning, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk, broadcasting each and every weekday morning from 6 to 9, and we've got a ton to get to, and let's jump right on into it with the latest coming Friday from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, where they issued a order to consolidate a bunch of gun ban challenges, not just challenging the state law, but also the local ordinances in Naperville and Chicago and Cook County. And this coming from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, where in the case Caleb Barnett versus Kwame Raoul et al., that's the case where you have four lawsuits against the state's gun ban in the Southern District, where there was an injunction in place, and that injunction kept the law from being enforced for 6 days. And a little bit later on, we'll delve into just how many firearm transfer information request forms were filed in that 6-day window. I was able to get that from Illinois State Police and compare it to the week before. So we'll take a look at that coming up later on. But during that 6-day window, people went out and purchased weapons, and then the state got a stay from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in that case, reversing that injunction, so the law is back in place. So what the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals did Friday is they kept that stay in place while they consolidated all four cases from the Southern District into the Northern District cases, challenging Naperville's ban, Cook County's ban, and several others, all lumped together now, and the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals issuing this order. We'll take a look at it here if you're following along on the live stream, but essentially it lays out all of the different plaintiffs here. You've got the city of Naperville that's being sued by Robert Beavis from Law Weapons. You've got Javier Herrera out of Chicago, Cook County. You've also got the cases with the Southern District of Illinois as well, and all being consolidated into the Northern District with the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. So the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals 3-judge panel issuing this order, essentially saying that there are briefs going to be due on June 5th, June 19th, reply briefs by June 22nd, and the case is actually going to be heard the morning of June 29th in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals out of Chicago. Now, what's interesting here is the expedited hearing schedule, and motions to extend those dates or to allow amici briefs will not be entertained. So they're moving forward with this pretty rapidly in an effort, some are saying, is to avoid the U.S. Supreme Court stepping in and taking this case, as has been requested by Robert Beavis out of the Naperville case. So you've got the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals issuing that stay, and in their order, they lay out that the court already has denied a motion for an injunction pending appeal in the Beavis case. As for the Barnett appeal, based on our review, the parties' submissions, the breadth of the litigation, and the differing conclusions reached by different district judges, we conclude that the stay on the district's court order already entered will remain in effect until these appeals have been resolved. So that's what the 3-judge panel on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals ordered on Friday, keeping the stay in place while consolidating all of these cases. And again, the Beavis case, the trajectory of that, they sued last year. They amended their complaint to include the state's law and the Naperville law, and then the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals heard that. The Northern District of Illinois courts heard that, and then they appealed to the 7th Circuit after the Northern District sided with the state and with Naperville. So Beavis appealed to the 7th Circuit, and he asked for a preliminary injunction while the case is on appeal. That was denied by the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and then Beavis went to the U.S. Supreme Court to request an emergency injunction while the case is being appealed. And you had Amy Coney Barrett issue a order for Naperville and the state of Illinois to reply to that motion for an emergency injunction. And if we look at the U.S. Supreme Court's docket on that case of the National Association for Gun Rights versus the city of Naperville, that's the Beavis case, you've got the state replying, you've got Naperville replying. But interesting, on Friday, after the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals issued their order to consolidate the cases and to keep a stay in place, the state of Illinois submitted a letter to the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett Friday. And here you've got the letter from the attorneys representing the state of Illinois as the defendants in the case, saying that please find an order from the U.S. Court of Appeals of the 7th District entered earlier today, Friday, which one sets an expedited briefing schedule for 5 pending appeals, also involving Second Amendment challenges to the Protect Illinois Communities Act, and scheduled oral arguments in those appeals. And the preliminary injunction entered into Barnett until 6 appeals are resolved. So they want to make sure that nothing happens with the U.S. Supreme Court until all 6 appeals are resolved. That's the request that the Illinois Attorney General's office with Kwame Raoul has put to the U.S. Supreme Court Friday after the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals issued an order to consolidate and said that the stay that the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals put on the Southern District's injunction remains in place. So that's just some of the legal maneuverings here that are happening this week and late Friday heading into this week. We're going to see even more movement, and obviously with the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals consolidating this, a lot of questions remain as to which judges are ultimately going to oversee the hearing when it happens in late June in the Chicago courts for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and how that is going to impact the U.S. Supreme Court possibly getting involved. Some legal analysts, even on YouTube, saying that you've got a lot of different, legal jujitsu happening, right? A lot of maneuvering. And people saying that, for instance, if the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals was to side with the plaintiffs in this case, then the defendants may not want to proceed forward to the U.S. Supreme Court and just take the L, because that would only apply to the jurisdictions within the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. But obviously, that's all speculation at this point. There's really not a lot of clear direction as to which way this is all going to go, as convoluted as it is. But things have advanced. You've got, again, just big headline here, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals keeping a stay in place against the injunction, blocking the state from enforcing the gun and magazine ban. So that stay reversed that injunction, and the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals wrapping all of these cases from the Southern District with the Northern District together with an expedited hearing schedule for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals to take all of these things into consideration, while you also have the state asking the U.S. Supreme Court to acknowledge that the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals is moving expeditiously. So in a way, the state's asking the U.S. Supreme Court to not intervene in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, an inferior court, when they have these proceedings taking place. So it's going to be a high-flying week. Coming back, we'll review a little bit of what to expect tomorrow with the Illinois Supreme Court taking up the challenge from the plaintiffs out of Macon County, including State Representative Dan Calkins. So stay tuned. That's coming up here on
Well, listen, if the Supreme Court eventually says that states or the Congress can't pass universal background checks or can't take these assault weapons off the streets, I think there's going to be a popular revolt over that policy. A court that's already pretty illegitimate is going to be in full crisis mode.
So a popular revolt, he says, if the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down gun control measures. And the Supreme Court is poised to do something along those lines, as you've got all of these cases, not just in Illinois, but across the country, dealing with bans on certain types of weapons. And this obviously is a pretty contentious issue, even here in Illinois, as you have federal cases that are all the way up in the U.S. Supreme Court. We could get clarity if the U.S. Supreme Court's actually going to move forward with a request for an emergency injunction against Naperville and the state of Illinois' ban, with the possibility of something being released today at about 8:30 our time. So we'll do what we can to review that. But that's after the state of Illinois requested the U.S. Supreme Court to recognize that the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals has an expedited hearing schedule and a briefing schedule for consolidated cases from the Southern District and the Northern District's federal courts in Illinois. So a lot of things moving with the federal courts, but the state court this week, we've got the Illinois Supreme Court tomorrow that's going to be hearing the challenge that was brought by State Representative Dan Calkins out of Macon County. And this is going to be an argument not about the Second Amendment, but about equal protections, because Illinois' law carves out some individuals to have access to what's plaintiffs say are commonly held firearms, while the rest of the public can't. And the Protect Illinois Communities Act carves out police, retired police, members of the active military members, but also individuals who work in private security or in the Department of Corrections, for instance. But it does not allow for veterans of the military to have access to that, nor does it allow just the regular citizen to have access to certain types of firearms. So the Illinois Supreme Court set to hear oral arguments tomorrow, and if you go to the Illinois Supreme Court's website, you can see just where exactly to find the live video stream. All right, so it's illinoiscourts.gov. You head over there, and you can see where you can go underneath courts. You go underneath oral arguments, audio, and video. That'll take you to the page where it'll populate tomorrow morning a video link that you can check out and watch it live. We'll be, of course, capturing that and bringing it to you to Wednesday morning with a review of what the debate and the arguments are and what trajectory the court could possibly go. But you've got that other storyline with the Illinois Supreme Court where you had Governor J.B. Pritzker, a main defendant in this case, and House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, a main defendant in this case, giving two then candidates for the Illinois Supreme Court $1 million plus. Welch gave six figures to these two candidates, but that's raised a lot of questions about the potential conflicts of interest and just the thought of a potential conflict of interest and how that can damage the public's view of the judiciary. Well, if you recall, weeks ago, the plaintiffs, Dan Calkins and his attorneys, they filed an official motion to have the two Illinois Supreme Court justices, Elizabeth Rochford and Mary O'Brien, recuse themselves from hearing the case because they received campaign contributions from main defendants in this case. So they made that official motion in the courts, and the Illinois Supreme Court denied that motion, and each justice also denied that motion, saying that there was no evidence of a conflict of interest. But the question is, should these justices recuse themselves? They've already said they won't. And if they are on the bench, which is expected they will be tomorrow morning, on the bench of 7, if they're on that bench and they hear this case and it goes poorly for the plaintiffs, there's even speculation that there could be some remedy of having this go to the federal courts after the Illinois Supreme Court puts out whatever ruling they put out. So, again, a lot of moving pieces this week, and it's going to be a big week, not just with what's happening with the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals consolidating the cases and the expedited briefing schedule while keeping the stay in place of the state's gun and magazine ban, but also the Illinois Supreme Court with their hearing Tuesday here in Springfield, and we'll definitely be watching that and bringing you the very latest. We've got a lot more to go with the overall conversation about gun litigation. A little bit later on today, we'll be talking about the bills that are passing the Illinois legislature, so check back in for that. You've got gun control bills that passed the House that could come up in the Senate in the final week of session this week, but I also was able to get some numbers of firearm transfer information reports, FTIPs, that show how many people requested a transfer of a firearm during that 6-day window the injunction was in place. So we'll touch on that as well. Plus, we'll have Todd Vandermeide joining us in the 8 o'clock hour to delve into all of this and more. We've got a ton more coming up. Stay tuned. It is Springfield's Morning News.